Hi guys, welcome or welcome back. Thank you so much for being here. It's so greatly appreciated. It truly is. Before we get started, let me give you my usual disclaimer. This video is for educational purposes only. Please do not take what I say as fact. Please always do your own research and come to your own conclusions. Next, if you have not liked, subscribed, or commented yet, please consider doing so because it really helps me out and I really appreciate it. I do feel compelled to start this video off with a trigger warning to inform you guys that this case covers a whole hell of a lot of sensitive topics. It also covers little ones. So with that being said, please be sure that you feel comfortable enough before deciding to continue watching. But now we have all that out of the way, let's jump right into this incredibly disturbing story that will probably get me demonetized. November 14th, 1959 started off as a normal, peaceful, happy night for the Clutter family at their beautiful farmhouse in Holcomb, Kansas. As nighttime fell, 48-year-old Herb Clutter, his wife, 45-year-old Bonnie Clutter, and two of their children, 16-year-old Nancy Clutter and 15-year-old Kenyon Clutter, had just settled in for the night. Herb Clutter was a very respected farmer. His wife, Bonnie, was a stay-at-home mom who devoted her entire life to her husband and her children. Nancy was a beautiful, boy-crazy, but also incredibly responsible teen. And Kenyon was a jokester, but he was also a doer. If he set his mind to something, he was determined to get it done. The family's two other children, Beverly and Eviana, had already left the home. They were doing their thing. One was living in Illinois and another was studying in Kansas City. So, this evening in particular should have played out just like most evenings at the Clutter home, except for the fact that two ex-cons, Richard Hickok and Perry Smith, were getting ready to execute a robbery on the Clutter family that they had been planning for weeks. The two ex-cons believed that Herb had a hidden treasure in a safe in the home, when in reality this could not have been further from the truth. While Herb was a very respected farmer, he dealt mostly in checks as opposed to cash, and he kept very little cash in the home. Hardly the treasure that these two cons drove over 400 miles for. Hickok and Smith enter the home through an unlocked door, which not locking your door was a huge thing back then. Not just in Kansas. I mean, my grandparents didn't lock their doors. So, and we don't live anywhere near Kansas. It was a thing back then. Everybody trusted everybody. So they enter the home. They begin searching for this hidden treasure, but they're unable to find it, mainly because it doesn't exist. That's when they go to Herb and Bonnie's room and wake them up from their peaceful sleep. From there, they grab Bonnie, Nancy, and Kenyon, and they throw them into a bathroom on the second floor. They then grab Herb and bring him down to his office, but again, they fail to find the treasure because you can't find something that's not there. After another failed search, the two become incredibly agitated. They pull Bonnie from the bathroom and place her in a bed on the second floor with her hands tied in front of her and a gag in her mouth. They then put Nancy back into her bed with her hands tied behind her back, but they don't gag Nancy. Lastly, they take Herb and Kenyon to the basement. They gag Kenyon, tie his hands behind his back, and place him on a small couch in an adjoining playroom. They then bound and gagged Herb and placed him on a mattress on the concrete floor in the boiler room. After the Clutter family are tightly secured in their spots, the two cons begin another search of the home for a treasure that they're never going to find because it's not there. The two men return to the basement and now they're pissed. They are pissed at this point because they can't locate the safe because there is no safe. Having already decided to not leave witnesses, it's time to get rid of the Clutter family for literally nothing. Nothing. And here's the thing. If they just tried a robbery, even if they got caught, whatever, I mean, you would have spent some time in prison, you would have got back out, but there was no need for what happens next. No need. Herb Clutter is first. Smith first, his throat, then him in the head. From there, they walk into the playroom and they Kenyon in the head. Then they enter the room where Nancy is and they her in the head. Before entering Bonnie's room and deciding to her in the head as well. The men collect all the shell casings and take off into the night. The aftermath. Following morning, November 15th, 1959, friends of the Clutter family arrive at their home to attend church with Nancy. This is something that they did every Sunday together. The cars are in the garage, and from the outside, everything looks perfectly normal. The only thing off to the friends is that they're unable to get in touch with Nancy or anybody else in the family. So, after several attempts to call Nancy, they decide to enter the home. Again, the doors are unlocked because at the time that's what they did. So, it is what it is. They walk into the home. No issues. Instead of finding Nancy still asleep, which is what they thought, they found her dead in her bed with blood splattered everywhere. Full of shock and fear, the friends call 911, but when they go to pick up the phone, when they go to grab the phone to call 911, I should say, they realize that the phone is off the hook and the phone lines have been cut. So it was actually Nancy's friend's dad that drove her to the Clutter home. So she jumps into her dad's car and they have to drive to a phone to call the police.
They did not lock their doors at night. They trusted their neighbors. They didn't expect evil to come to their door.
Police arrive at the Clutter family house and they stumble across this horrific scene. The aftermath of these would shake the entire community to their core. Hardware stores are unable to keep door locks in stock. The demand absolutely outweighs the production.
We didn't know who did it or why. Everybody was on edge.
It truly made a different community. There was fear for the first time.
And stuff like this didn't happen in Holcomb, Kansas. And with the killer or killers still on the loose, this is terrifying. During the investigation, police found 2 separate sets of footprints indicating that there was definitely more than one. Well, actually, I should say, so I want to say this right. They photographed one, but then when they printed the pictures, they spotted another set of footprints that was not visible to the naked eye. It actually came up in the pictures.
We were able to see a boot print that one could not observe with the naked eye.
They knew that there was a potential of a second suspect.
So, for the deaths of the 4 people, the only thing that the killers walked away with was a portable radio and a pair of binoculars. That's it. All that for a portable radio and a pair of binoculars. The police initially thought that Herb's daughters might be responsible for the deaths. And it made sense initially because the day before their deaths, Herb signed a $40,000 life insurance policy that would go straight to the girls upon his death. But after more investigating and speaking with Bonnie and Beverly, police realized that this was not a murder for life insurance. It was a terribly heartbreaking coincidence. They also spoke to Nancy's boyfriend, Bobby, who spent a few hours with the Clutters at their home the night, well, really the night of the murders, and it is said that Herb wasn't super happy about Nancy's relationship, not because of Bobby himself, I don't think. I think it was more because he just felt like his 16-year-old daughter was way too young to be in such a serious relationship, which is understandable, you know. I mean, that's just a dad looking out for his daughter. But that night, Bobby had left the home around 10 p.m., just before the Clutters were killed, making him the last person to see that family alive. But after speaking with him, they were able to eliminate him as well. Okay. And even though this poor kid who had just lost the love of his life and was basically shaken to his core, because also don't forget, if this had happened a few hours prior, he would still be there and he would probably be dead as well. So he's presumed innocent, but he is guilty in the court of public opinion. They tortured this kid to the point that he was forced to switch high schools his senior year to escape the false accusations and harassment. From there, police look into some small business rivals of Herb, but that also turns out to be a dead end, leaving investigators scratching their heads and worrying that this case might go cold. 3 days after the deaths of the Clutter family, their funerals were held, bringing in hundreds of people to pay their respects. Again, they were a very, very loved family. In an even more fucked up twist, the eldest daughter, Beverly, was set to be married the following month. But because police were not sure who was responsible for these crimes, they urged Beverly to change her name now to avoid being the next target. In other words, they were worried that they want to take out all the Clutters. So if she's Beverly Clutter, they're scared that she'll be next. This is an absolute possibility, right? If we're being honest. So Beverly and her fiance decide to say their vows during her family's funeral. Okay, before we go any further, let me give you a little backstory about our killers. Richard Eugene Hickok was the firstborn to farm worker parents in Kansas City. Growing up, he excelled in baseball, basketball, and football. He grew up in a very loving home, had great grades throughout school, had plans to become an engineer after graduation. When the time came for college, his family wasn't financially stable enough to send him to college, so he opted to get a job with the Santa Fe Railroad in Kansas City. When he was 19 years old, he married his 16-year-old girlfriend, Carol. He would later drive an ambulance for a local hospital before transitioning into a mechanic and a car painter. It seemed as if he was living the dream. He had a wife, a home, a car, and a loving family. Then one night, everything changes. Richard would become involved in a serious car accident, with his car crashing into the water off the side of the road. The accident left him face down and unconscious. And while he did survive the ordeal, it was not without lasting complications. He was left with severe head injuries, a slightly disfigured face, and asymmetrical features on his face. That was tough to get out. His father would later acknowledge that he was never the same after the accident. His personality shifted. He started becoming involved in various crimes. He became a serious gambler. He wrote bad checks, and he began cheating on Carol with an older mistress. Then he would eventually decide to leave Carol for the mistress and go on to have 3 children with her. As time went on, Richard would begin to up the ante on his crimes, which most criminals do. He moved on to stealing guns and attempted to sell them. Eventually, the law would catch up to him and he would find himself at the Lansing Penitentiary. Okay. Perry Edward Smith, on the other hand, had a completely different upbringing from his future partner in crime. Perry was born in Huntington, Nevada, to Tex and Flo, who were a pair of rodeo performers. and he grew up in a very tumultuous family. In 1929, his family moved to Alaska, where his father would begin distilling bootleg whiskey for a living. The marriage between Tex and Flo would eventually crumble after his father became to him, his mother, and his siblings. So Flo packed up and moved her and the kids to San Francisco. But for all of us single moms out there, we know how difficult life is. So it should come as no surprise that Flo was struggling. She began trying to numb her pain with alcohol as well, which also never ends great. All of this affected Perry so much that he found himself in prison for the first time at 8 years old. 8 years old. Oh my God. What a fucking mess. It only gets worse, but it only gets worse. When he was 13 years old, Flo would pass away after a drunken bender that left her choking on her own vomit. After the death of Flo, the children were shuffled around to different orphanages and homes. To make matters even more diabolical, the children would be subjected to emotional and physical abuse in these homes. Later on in life, Perry would try to reconnect with his father, but their relationship never improved, and Perry moved on to petty theft to survive. Because he was uneducated, it was difficult for him to find a stable career. So, at one point, he did join the army, and he also fought in the Korean War before receiving an honorable discharge in 1952. But apparently, even the army could not turn this soldier into a decent human being. He would later buy a motorcycle with the money that he made, I guess, from being a veteran. And this would result in a very serious accident, leaving him hospitalized for 6 months and with permanent leg disabilities and chronic pain. Fast forward to 1956, Perry would be convicted of grand larceny and car theft, and he would also find himself in the Lansing Penitentiary in Kansas. It would be here that he would meet and befriend Richard Hickok. Then in early 1959, Perry would be released from prison. In November of that same year, Richard Hickok would also be released from prison. So at this point, we have two psychotic criminals running the streets. Actually, two psychotic criminals that are buddies running the streets. What could possibly go wrong? After Hickok's release, he reached out to Perry and asked him to break his parole, come to Kansas City, and help him with a robbery that he had been planning. Obviously, the robbery is meant for the Clutter family, but how the family came across his radar is actually quite interesting, and it becomes a key factor in this case. Okay. Meeting Floyd Wells. During his first incarceration at Lansing Penitentiary, Richard would meet 32-year-old Floyd Wells. So, who is Floyd Wells? Floyd Wells was an inmate at the time of the murders, but 10 years prior to this, he worked for the Clutter family, and the $1,000 reward for information was enough to get him to talk. Floyd started working for the Clutter family on their farm when he was 19 years old. He said that he loved the Clutter family. He spoke about how good they were to him. Floyd said that he loved his time with the Clutter family. He spoke about how good they were to him. And he even tells a story about how Mr. Clutter surprised him with a $50 Christmas bonus one year, and went on to speak about how incredibly kind this family was. That's the thing. Everybody that talks about this family says how wonderful they are, how kind they are, and how loved they are. Following his work with the Clutter family, Floyd worked odd jobs, fell in love, got married, and joined the Army. 10 years later, in June of 1959, Floyd found himself behind bars for breaking into hardware stores and trying to steal a lawnmower. Okay. His new passion at this time, in 1959, was to start a landscaping business. The only problem is you can't start a landscaping business without landscaping equipment. But unfortunately for him, he would end up getting caught, getting arrested, and getting slapped with a 5-year prison sentence. And no landscaping business, obviously. It's at this point that he meets Hickok. During one of their many conversations, Floyd tells Hickok about the Clutter family, their farm, and their generosity, not only to him, but to the entire community. He went on to tell Hickok about how he once watched Mr. Clutter pay a pretty big bill in cash from a safe inside the home. Okay, I know we're all going to say. But to that was 10 years prior, so maybe he didn't have the safe anymore. Maybe he stopped dealing in cash. I don't really know. What I do know is that at the time of, there was no safe, there was no cash. Going on to tell him that that week alone, he watched Mr. Clutter pay $10,000 in bills. From that day forward, Floyd says that Hickok would constantly ask questions about the Clutter family. How many were there? How old were they? What is the layout of the home? Where does he keep the safe? And Floyd answered all of his questions, claiming that he had no idea where this line of questioning was leading. Sir, for real? For real? After he got the information he needed, Hickok began talking a lot about the Clutter family, a plan for them, and began talking about his potential accomplice, Perry Smith. The plan was to drive to the Clutter home, tie them up, take the money, and don't leave any witnesses. Floyd claims he didn't take Hickok seriously at the time, and he just chalked it up to prison talk. But that would all change one day when Floyd is sitting in his cell, listening to his radio, and he hears the news about the Clutter family murders. Floyd first decided to stay quiet, fearing that if he snitched and he was found out, that it would cost him a whole hell of a lot, because inmates hate snitches and snitches receive consequences. Not only that, but he was also scared that they would try to pin this on him. I mean, he did give them all the information, and he wasn't the most stand-up citizen in the world, so could this get pinned on him? Of course. Eventually, he would confide in an inmate friend of his that he trusted and who was very religious. The friend helped him set up a plan to go speak with the warden. He promised him that he would make it look like he was getting in trouble for something as opposed to going to snitch. So the following day, Floyd went to talk to the warden and tell him everything that he knew. 10 days after that, they confirmed the information that was being told and decided that they had everything they needed to put the people responsible for this behind bars where they belonged. They knew who was responsible, they just didn't know where to find them. And criminals can make a lot of distance between themselves and the crime scene in 10 days. When police conducted a search of Richard and Perry's home, they found a bloody shirt and a shotgun. By this time, the killers had sold the radio and the flashlight they stole from the Clutters, along with the car they used to drive there, and they fled to Mexico. By this time, the had sold the radio and the flashlight that they stole from the Clutters, along with the car that they used to drive them there, and they fled to Mexico. They stay in Mexico for a while they plan to return to the United States and commit enough crimes to be able to afford them a trip to Brazil, because they believed that they wouldn't be able to be extradited from Brazil to the United States to face consequences should they get caught. 31 days after the Clutter family perished, Hickok and Smith returned to the United States. The pair stole a car in Iowa before ending up back in Kansas City, and they began writing bad checks, something that they did quite often. After writing a bad check at a furniture store, though, employees phoned police. When officers showed employees mugshots of the two men that they were looking for, they confirmed that they were indeed the two that tried to pass the bad check. The pair would go from Kansas City to Miami, Florida, which comes up much later, so put a pin in that. And from there, they would shoot over to Las Vegas. The whole time driving the stolen car from Iowa. Police would finally catch on to their whereabouts and pull them over in the stolen car. When they popped the trunk of the car, they find two pairs of boots that match the bloody footprints at the scene. They now have enough to place them at the scene of the crime. So, Kansas City police fly out to Las Vegas, put them in separate rooms, and begin interrogating them. Police inform the two that they have all the evidence that they need to place them at the scene of the crime and to charge them with the Clutter family murders. Hickok talks first, telling investigators, "I never pulled the trigger. In fact, I didn't know what the hell was going on. I was in the other room when it first happened." He goes on to tell police that when they couldn't find the safe, they went back to ask Herb where it was located. He said he told him that there wasn't a safe, and that's when Perry his throat and killed him. Then he tells them that he could hear gurgling noises coming from Herb Clutter.
I heard a commotion in where Mr. Clutter was. I don't know how to describe it more. It's like a gurgling noise. That's when I seen that it cut his throat. What did he use to cut up that big? That hot knife. Well, he cut the hell out of it.
Awful. Awful. Sick. On January 4th, that following year, they were both charged with the Clutter family and brought back to Kansas. Perry originally denied being involved in the Clutter murders. So, this is crazy. When officers told Perry that Hickok had confessed to them, he initially didn't believe them. But then officers repeated a story made up by Perry about him unaliving a man, okay? The story is absolute fiction, and the only person he told this story to was Richard Hickok. And if I had to guess, he told him this story for bragging rights. Not in case he ever, I don't think that's the reason he told him. I think the reason he told him the story was for bragging rights. But when police reiterated the story to Perry, that's when he knew. All right, he started talking. So, Perry decided to talk as well. Perry told officers that he killed the men and Hickok killed the women. He later said that he killed all of the family members. So first he says he did the men, Hickok did the women. Then he changes his story and takes credit for everybody. When he's asked why he's taking the blame for the entire Clutter family, he says because Richard Hickok's mom is so kind that he doesn't want her to think that her son would be capable of such horrific crimes. The trial begins on March 22nd, 1960 in Garden City, Kansas, with 4 of the jury members knowing the Clutter family personally. Because again, they were very well known, they were very well loved. Both men were found guilty and sentenced to death on May 13th, 1960.
He was very sober. I have to tell you, he was not happy to be there. And shocked, I think, is the way he looked.
And Art Wilson did not mince words in his 4.5-minute news report that quickly became an editorial.
I come from this cold, bleak, ancient warehouse with a remorse feeling that by being a part of this society, I played a part in the execution. The trapdoor was dropped at 12:19 a.m. 22 minutes later, the penitentiary doctor pronounced death at 12:41. This is a hell of a way for a life to be taken.
Richard Hickok, the first to be executed, decided by a coin toss. Perry Smith's was second. The gallows, now stored at the Kansas State Historical Museum in Topeka. Dismantled, the museum says it has no plans to display them.
I have seen the newly born, and there I saw a purpose. I have seen the maimed, the crippled, and the dead, and even there I saw a purpose. But what I saw tonight, I saw no purpose.
Hatteberg says he's just grateful his assignment was outside the prison.
It's something that I didn't want to see. It's something that I didn't want to witness. But it's something that will stay with me forever.
While on death row, Perry began writing poetry. One of his works read, "But he who thinks man is bare, discarded of pride by force, has not the depth of soul to share emotions at its source. Perhaps my eyes shall never reach the light of freedom's skies, but forever my hopes will span the breach to keep my human ties." April 14th, 1965, Richard Hickok and Perry Smith are officially executed. When asked if they had any last words, Hickok said, "I should have had my neck broke long ago before we pulled that caper out in Kansas for what I did to that woman and my kids." That woman being the mistress, turned wife, and his 3 children. In regards to the Clutter family, he had nothing to say. Perry said, "I think it's a hell of a thing that a life has been taken in this manner. You don't say. I say this especially because there's a great deal I could have offered society. I certainly think capital punishment is legally and morally wrong. Any apology for what I have done would be meaningless at this time. I don't have any animosities towards anyone involved in this matter. I think that is all." The entitlement on this is mind-blowing. What? Who would you have animosity for? I just want to know who the actual fuck would you have animosity for when you took out an entire family for no reason while they slept in their home minding their own damn business. Richard Hickok was put to death first, with Perry following just 20 minutes later. The town of Holcomb, Kansas dedicated a park to the Clutter family, and 50 years after their deaths put up a memorial for them. Following the murders in 1966, a man by the name of Truman Capote wrote an in-depth novel about the Clutter family. In the book, he comes up with a conspiracy theory that Hickok and Perry might be the ones responsible for another family's murder, except this one is unsolved. The Walker family murders. This murder took place on December 20th, 1959 in Osprey, Florida. And if you remember the pin, the 2 men were in Miami at this time before deciding to leave to go to Las Vegas. The Walker family, which consisted of the 25-year-old father Cliff, the 24-year-old wife Christine, a 3-year-old son named Jimmy, and a 1-year-old daughter named Debbie. The Walker family lived and worked at Palmer Ranch. Okay, on December 20th, Cliff's co-worker, a man by the name of John, showed up to the ranch to pick up Cliff so that the 2 could go hog hunting. When Dawn pulled up to the home, something felt very off. Okay, the home was very dark and eerily quiet, which is completely out of the ordinary for the Walker family. And anybody that has raised or is currently raising toddlers, you understand completely, especially in the morning, your home is not dark and not eerily quiet. Okay? I never had a dark, quiet home in the morning when my children were toddlers. Ever. Dawn went up to the door to knock, but nobody answers. Listening to his gut instinct, he decides to enter the home completely unaware of what he would find, but also never expecting what he did find. He found Christine in the living room in a pool of her own blood. Cliff and 3-year-old Jimmy were in the corner of the room in the same condition as Christine. Ran out of the house, calls police, and when they arrive, they find 1-year-old Debbie deceased in the bathtub. Okay, Cliff and Christine, they met in Arcadia, Florida. Cliff was described as a reserved introvert, while Christine was described as outgoing and high energy. At the time of their deaths, Cliff and Christine had been married for 5 years, and they were a very happily married couple. The timeline of their death. The day before, on December 19th, the Walker family is out running errands. Christine arrives home around 4 p.m. to put away groceries. The family had plans to go car shopping for a 1956 Chevy and a Hudson Jet after Cliff and the children arrived back home. So that day, the family was together for the majority of the day. Cliff, Christine, and the kids were at Dawn's house, hanging out with Dawn and his wife. Because Cliff and Dawn had work to do. They worked together on the ranch. They were co-workers. So Christine leaves. She goes home to put groceries away. The kids ask if they could stay and help Dad. So she says, of course. And then when Dad's finished with work, he'll come home and they're going to finish car shopping. Okay. It's unknown how the killers entered the home, but what is known is that Christine fought for her life. Not only by the signs of a struggle around the home, but also by the blood on the heel of Christine's shoe. Christine would also end up being SA'd before being and ultimately losing her fight. It's believed that Cliff arrived home with the kids after Christine was already gone, and that's when Cliff and the kids all suffered the same fate. Cliff and the kids were also killed. But it's unknown why baby Debbie was taken to the bathroom. Okay, there is a theory that maybe she was taken to the bathtub to drown her after they failed to kill her and they ran out of ammunition. Yeah. So that is one possibility. One thing that did stand out to police when they were canvassing the scene, though, was that Christine's car was parked far enough back from the front door that it seemed as if there was a car in front of her when she pulled in. Because, don't forget, she had a car full of groceries. So if you have a car full of groceries, you're parking as close to your door as you freaking can. Period, point blank. So it makes no sense that she would park a car lengths away from her front door. When officers went through Cliff's car, they found feed in the back of his car that needed to be delivered to the barn. And they also found a rifle in his car, indicating that Cliff was not fearful or taken back by anything that he saw outside of the home. If he was, he most definitely would have, number one, taken a gun inside with him. Let's be real. And number two, he never would have taken those children inside that home if he thought something was weird and he had to go into that home with a gun to find out what was going on. There's no way in hell he would have brought those children into the home. No sane person would. Here's another thing. The Clutter family, the only things that were stolen were the radio and a flashlight. The Walker family, the only things that were stolen was a pocket knife, Christine's high school band uniform, and the couple's marriage license. There was a bloody footprint found, but they were unsure if it belonged to one of the killers or one of the officers at the scene. Here we go again. Officers screwing shit up. In the pool of blood around Christine, they found cellophane wrapper to a pack of Cool cigarettes, which didn't match the cigarette brand that Cliff smoked. There was semen found on Christine, but at the time there was no, because she was SA'd. So there was semen found in Christine's underwear, but at the time DNA did not even kind of exist, so there was no way to check for anything. Although they did take samples. Police also found a strand of dark hair and a strand of blonde hair that didn't match any of the family members. Okay, this is the worst part. There were tire marks in front of the home left by the killers, but an investigator unknowingly drove right over them at the crime scene, destroying the tire marks. Which is arguably the most crucial piece of evidence at the scene. And an investigator destroyed it. The whole entire crime scene was handled like shit from the beginning, in my opinion. Then, a few months later, a woman that lived about a mile away from the Walker family goes into her barn, and inside there she finds 2 bloody shirts, a skirt, a handkerchief, and a third shirt that belonged to Cliff Walker. So it's believed that the killer or killers went there to clean up after murders and just tossed everything into this woman's barn. Nothing else would ever come of it though, and the case would go stone cold. Then in 2007, a detective by the name of Kimberly McGrath reopened the case in an attempt to connect the Walker family murders to the Clutter family murders. Not to mention that on the morning of the Walker family murders, Perry and Hickok checked out of their Miami hotel and were later seen at a store in Sarasota, Florida, 10 miles away from the Walker home. On top of this, when Perry and Hickok were arrested, officers found a pocket knife on Perry that resembled the knife that was stolen from Cliff. They were both given polygraphs for the murders of the Walkers, and they both passed. Another conspiracy theory is that the 2 men were pretending to sell a 1956 Chevy, because not only was this the car that they stole in Iowa when they came back from Mexico, it was also the car that Christine had plans on going to look for once Cliff got home with the children. On top of this, the killers took dumb, meaningless shit from the Walker family, just like the Clutter family. The similarities are incredibly creepy, especially if they truly weren't the ones responsible. Like, it's just really creepy, right? Okay, extracting the bodies. On December 8th, 2012, the bodies of Perry Smith and Richard Hickok were exhumed at Mount Muncie Cemetery in Lansing, Kansas.
At Muncie Cemetery in Lansing, fresh dirt covers the graves of 2 of Kansas' most notorious killers, Perry Smith, a young drifter, and Richard Hickok of KCK, both who killed in cold blood, not just in Holcomb, Kansas, but at a news conference today, a claim they may have also murdered another family of 4 in Florida.
The Sarasota homicides occurred approximately a month after the Holcomb homicides, and there may be a connection.
There's evidence of pretty solid claims the pair were in Florida on the run in December 1959. The 2 were eventually arrested in 1960 in Las Vegas. They were convicted of killing Herb Clutter and his family and hung in 1965. They're buried side by side now in Lansing since no one claimed their bodies. Capote's book, In Cold Blood, is considered a most important 20th century book.
Generally, Capote's book is considered a milestone in true crime dramas, the first true crime novel, if you will.
This says investigators opened the graves about 8 this morning. They took bones from the remains that they hope will contain DNA that may match DNA found on one of the Florida victims. The bodies were reburied and the graves closed around noon today.
The idea behind exhuming the bodies was to try and match the DNA from Perry and Hickok to the semen that was found in Christine's underwear. Genius. But in August of 2023, Sarasota police announced that they couldn't find an exact match between the DNA from Perry and Hickok and the semen found in Christine Walker's underwear. But investigators did say this does not mean that Perry and Richard were not responsible, but rather claim that inconclusive results were attributed to potential DNA degradation over decades of contamination. What an absolute blow for the friends and family of the Walkers. And I just truly, truly hope at some point some of them get answers. Because how awful to not only lose an entire family of loved ones, but to never have answers. Oh God, that's gotta be the not knowing has to be just as hard as the murders were. Just the not knowing, no answers. I think that's gotta be the worst part. Never knowing what really happened and never knowing if the person responsible was ever brought to justice. If you guys are still here, thank you, thank you, thank you. I love you and I appreciate you so, so, so very much. Please like, subscribe, and comment if you haven't yet and you feel so inclined to, because it really helps me out. I really, really appreciate it. And until next time, stay safe out there.